usual commentators back with me. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, Matt.
We've also got Patrick Maguire, Times Red Box editor.
Hello.
Big day for you, Patrick.
Massive day.
Red Box, the actual Red Box is out and about and being waved around.
It is just named in our honour.
Exactly right.
Of course.
Exactly right. Lucy, any more glimpses of is there anything left in the budget that hasn't already been briefed?
Well, I think there must be some kind of rabbit. You know, we first got wind of the childcare announcements at the weekend. I think the Sunday Times had the best level of detail. There was more in the papers yesterday before they went to press. So I'm still hopeful for some surprise.
For the purposes of keeping the afternoon moving. Patrick, what's your sense? I mean, the Treasury's done a pretty good job with this sort of drip feeding. They've had one of pretty good headlines so far.
Yeah, you wouldn't have thought that leaking details of your own budget was once a sacking offence, as Hugh Dalton learned to his cost in the late 40s. No, you're right. They have done a good job of pre-briefing this. That the big childcare story landed in The Guardian yesterday is an example of quite deft media management on Jeremy Hunt and his team's part. It'll be interesting to see the tone, sort of the rhetoric he uses to weave all of this together, because we've had sort of back to work was very much the message in his Sunday media round, and in the trails over the past couple of days, he's been using the word growth, almost trying to reclaim the word growth from the Trussites in his own party. So it'll be really interesting to see the tone and tenor of his speech.
Now, we've got PMQs coming up in a moment, but the big job for Keir Starmer today is due to a quirk of parliamentary procedure, which I'm not totally sure why it exists, but it's the leader of the opposition who responds to a budget rather than the shadow chancellor, Rachel Rees. So straight after doing PMQs, Keir Starmer then needs to sit through the budget and then respond to it instantly. And Patrick, you spoke to William Hague about the difficulties.
As I often do.
In doing, I was a valued colleague, just hanging around by the water cooler. William Hague talking about having to obviously do it, responding to Gordon Brown's budgets. This is him talking when Keir Starmer was going up against Rishi Sunak.
Your mission as Leader of the Opposition on Budget Day is not a whole economic framework. You're not setting out to present the complete alternative to what the Chancellor's just been working on for months and just presented to you. You've got two objectives. One is to raise the morale of your own side, because they've just been treated to this popular Chancellor who's got all these cards to play and is making his announcements in his own way, and no doubt will have done that in a way that's advantageous to the government. So this can be quite depressing for your own side in Parliament. So one objective is to raise their morale straight away by showing there is a spirited counterattack that you can make straight away.
We must always remember that rarely, if ever, has a government had such cause to be grateful to its predecessor for the state of the economy it has inherited.
Your other objective is to get your main point onto the news, and indeed to do that very quickly in your response, because within about 2 or 3 minutes of you starting your speech, most networks will shift onto analysing the budget.
So it's a big moment for Keir Starmer today, Lucy. What do you think will be, given that so far at least it's all been goodies from Jeremy Hunt in terms of the pre-briefing, what do you think Keir Starmer will be looking out for?
Well, to me, the most obvious attack line harks back to the damage done by the Kamikaze budget of last autumn.
Well, definitely. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we hear Kamikaze at some point.
Because, of course, that has led to the faster rate of interest rates rises. And for every 1 percentage point rise in the base rate, that is an extra £20 billion that the Treasury must spend just on servicing public sector debt interest, not even getting the capital debt down itself. So I think that there will be a lot of talk about that, about how this Conservative government, Labour's pushed the mortgage premium line, not how those interest rate rises are affecting individual households, but also the nation's kind of credit card as well, I think is a really good point. But for me, I was actually just enjoying going back through some of the recent opposition leader responses. And there've actually been quite a few disasters in recent years, including Ed Miliband being accused of plagiarising himself, recycling huge chunks of old speeches. In 2014, he forgot to mention any detail in the budget itself. He gave a budget response that had a budget-sized hole in it. I think possibly most damaging in 2010 was the response to Osborne's post-election mini-budget, where Labour was so distracted in the wake of losing the election that they really failed to mount a convincing rebuttal of the idea of austerity, and it allowed that new coalition government to completely embed the narrative that Labour had, crashed the car,
Really good point,
had, maxed out the government's credit card, had failed to fix the roof while the sun was shining, and that just set the tone for, frankly, the next sort of,
well, the 13
decade
years
ahead.
almost that have followed. So, well, let's pick through some of the best and worst examples then of leaders of the opposition responding to the budget. So this first one is from 2007. So Gordon Brown's last budget, I think, before he then became Prime Minister. Everyone knew that he was on course to replace Tony Blair, which David Cameron had a lot of fun with.
It is a bit like Stalin. They're cheering him on now, and he'll wipe them out later. Let me tell you what the Chancellor's real problem is. It's not that he's a Stalinist who holds all his colleagues in contempt, although I have to say that probably doesn't help. It's that he has wasted money on an industrial scale. That is the truth, Mr. Deputy Speaker. His great experiment in tax and spending has failed. He's an out-of-date politician, wedded to state control. And the question everybody's asking is, where has the money gone?
And that ended up, as Lucy was just saying, Patrick, that was a message that the Tories just carried on and on and on.
Yeah, exactly. Even though around that time, that's pre-crash.
Yeah.
The Tories are, at that point, committed, as Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were, at a similar point in their opposition cycle, to matching the Labour Party's spending plans note for note. And it's interesting. It'll be interesting to hear Keir Starmer's critique, because if you listen to Rachel Reeves and Pat McFadden, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, they are striking a very similar note. They want to stay within the Tories' fiscal envelope, despite the fact that their messaging may well be perhaps similar to what we just heard from David Cameron there, about a critique of waste and high tax.
But actually, Rachel Reeves and Pat McFadden, both scarred veterans of that Ed Miliband era, where they were constantly on the back foot on the economy, while the Tories or the coalition pursued austerity.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And also, two people who shadow ministers say with a mixture of admiration, fear and derision, who are very much in hock to Treasury orthodoxy and are very, dry as dust.
I'll give a ring at the bell for Treasury orthodoxy.
Well, no, but they very much are.
Yeah.
Rachel Reeves, a former Treasury civil servant.
Yeah,
That's going to be the interesting thing about Labour government if we get one. It's be run by two career bureaucrats, basically.
What's that? You want more talking about Ed Miliband? Let's hear a clip from Ed Miliband at the 2013 budget, responding to George Osborne, of course. Let's take a listen.
Let's have some tax transparency. Hands up in the cabinet if you're going to benefit from the income tax cut. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. Just nod if you're going to benefit from it, or shake your head if you're not. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on, we've got plenty of time. Come on, we've got plenty of time. One more chance. Nod or shake your head. Are you going to benefit?
Who could have possibly predicted he wasn't going to win the election?
Even 10 years on, my toes haven't uncurled.
Is that before? Sorry, this is going to sound like a horrible ad hominem, but is that before he had his adenoids out?
I'm not sure. It was never quite as clear as, Margaret Thatcher lowering her voice. Ed Miliband in his adenoids. Let's jump ahead to 2020.
Enough said.
This was the Times. This is what Quentin Letts, Times sketchwriter, called Jeremy Corbyn's response to the 2020 budget the least energetic thing he'd ever seen. Let's have a listen.
A failure of ambition and a bitter disappointment to all those people who had been promised so much. But from what we've heard today, they're actually going to see very, very little.
So talk about going out with a bang.
Well, that's also what strikes me there is you can hear how sort of lacklustre the murmuring was from the Labour benches, but that's something I'll be looking out for today, because it feels to me that in recent PMQs, it's the Tory benches where the whips managed to get government toadies to really cheer and roar, and the Labour MPs just don't get going as much.
Yeah, Labour whips in recent weeks have had to beg not Tory MPs, Labour MPs to turn up to PMQs, such as the lack of enthusiasm on their benches.
Really interesting.
Also, Labour MPs are putting in less for the ballot, which is why we're seeing the Lib Dems and SNP, I think, get more
their names out the hat
opposition
more.
questions. They're making sure all their MPs put one in.
Right, well, it's coming up. PMQs Unpacked is next. Lucy Fisher, we'll see you later on. Lucy will be here all afternoon, bringing you the best analysis and reaction to the budgets. But stand by. PMQs Unpacked is live on Times Radio and the Times Radio YouTube channel. Next, stay tuned.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. In a moment, we'll go live to the comments of PMQs Unpacked. But first, a look at the headlines this lunchtime. The Chancellor is preparing to set out his budget, which will include a £4 billion extension of free childcare. Jeremy Hunt hopes to help parents into work by making 1 in 2-year-olds in England eligible for 30 funded hours. He's also freezing energy bills for another 3 months. Meanwhile, transport, education and health services are all being disrupted today as hundreds of thousands of workers take part in strike action. The head of one union representing civil servants says there will be a significant escalation unless ministers agree to discuss pay. British and German aircraft have been scrambled to intercept a Russian plane near Estonian airspace. It follows a possible crash yesterday between a Russian fighter jet and the US drone over the Black Sea. And police in Austria have warned of a possible Islamist-motivated attack against churches. They say the country's intelligence services received information about a non-specific threat. Security has been tightened around churches and other buildings in the capital, Vienna, with more police being put on patrol. Right, now live on Times Radio and on the Times Radio YouTube channel. It's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Patrick Maguire and Tim Shipman.
Or not, as the case may be. So Patrick Maguire is here. Patrick, how are you?
They're dancing on the streets of Southport on my overdue return, Matt. I'm really happy to be here, if not that excited for the budget.
Well, welcome to the PMQs that really doesn't matter, even more than usual.
Well, that's the interesting thing, speaking to people if you'll allow me to just go in with my studs up to this pre-match analysis. It's a really interesting thing people around Keir Starmer have been considering. What do you do with this pointless pre-budget PMQs? You can't ask substantive questions about the economy or domestic policy because Rishi Sunak will just smile sweetly and say, you're going to wait for my fantastic budget in half an hour's time. So usually Keir Starmer has chosen to use this session to put things on the record, different policy issues that may be useful going forward, that is useful to have on the record. So he's used it for Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Britain's links to that conflict before. He's used it to ask questions about COP before. Indeed, that's what Ed Miliband did, if you remember, when he filled in for PMQs when Keir Starmer tested positive for COVID and had to self-isolate for the 5th time in October 2021. So it'll be interesting to see what the Labour Party and Keir Starmer are light on, what they want to get on the record this time. I suspect it might be something about migration.
That was interesting. Let us know what you think might come up if you are on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Ahoy. Ahoy. Ahoy, says John. Ahoy from the heart of Sherwood Forest. Good morning from Indiana, says Marie. Hi from Wiltshire, says Wendy. Lou is in Pennsylvania. Morgan's in London. Andy's in Taunton. Hello, Andy. Hello from Brixton, says Henry. Terry says, where were the students and that excellent teacher this week, Patrick? Too much of a threat. They were very good last week. We had some politics students and they certainly...
I run my own PMQs Unpacked madrasa, trying to, a new generation of pundits.
Hello from Bedford, says Ollie. Nicola's in Zurich. Any Credit Suisse news? Do let us know, Nicola, because that might end up being the biggest story of all. We've got people in Liverpool and Plymouth and Bristol and Cape Town.
What's the name of the Liverpudlian?
Harlequin Dreamer.
I don't know them.
Is that a friend of yours?
I hope not.
Do let us know if you do live in near the house where there's a blue plaque that reveals where Patrick Maguire was born.
Very few blue plaques in Southport, AJP Taylor doesn't even have one.
There we are. Could we do something about that?
I'm trying.
Right, let us know what you think might be happening. We will bring you the budget live from 12:30. Jeremy Hunt is on the front bench. Sitting there ready to go. Rishi Sunak is at the dispatch box. I'm trying to work out who's that sitting behind Rishi Sunak. It's slightly obscured to his left.
Is that Craig Williams, his PPS?
On the bench.
Michelle Donelan.
That was Michelle Donelan. There we are, yeah.
The Secretary of State for Science.
For science, of course she is. Of course she is. Right, enough of this playing of Guess Who. Let's go live to the House of Commons then. It is question number 1 from Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last summer, the Prime Minister claimed he wanted to protect free speech and put a stop to no platforming. So how concerned was he by last week's campaign by Tory MPs to cancel a broadcaster?
Mr. Speaker, as I said at the time, the issues between Gary Lineker and the BBC were for them to resolve, and I'm very glad that they did, and we can look forward to watching Match of the Day again on our screens.
Further confirmation that Keir Starmer is not overly bothered about this round of PMQs by asking about a story that was in the news last week.
No, exactly. And I think it's a sign that it's interesting how he's chosen to approach the Gary Lineker question, not by talking about the iniquities and inhumanity, as some Labour MPs see it, of the government's migration policy, but basically taking the mickey out of Tory MPs. It's quite clear, and this is the view of people around Keir Starmer, that this isn't the biggest story of national import ever. It is actually an opportunity to have some fun at the expense of the Conservative Party. It'd be interesting, though, to see if he uses this to make a bigger, more serious argument about the BBC and its relationship to the Conservative Party.
And actually, I suppose this could go one of two ways. You're right. It could be about the BBC. It could be sort of a high-minded debate about freedom of speech, or does he just use it to take the mickey out of Tory MPs?
6 questions is a long old time to be doing stand-up, especially if you're Keir Starmer.
I mean, half of my stand-up show was just working your way through Tory MPs who'd said daft things. But anyway, of which there are plenty.
You've had lots of practice. Keir Starmer has never done a run at the Fringe, has he?
No, that is true. That is true. Although, Bloomsbury was my best audience, which isn't far from his neck of the woods. He'd probably go down quite well.
He's the MP for you should have given him a complimentary ticket, yeah.
I don't think he'd have enjoyed it. Let's go back to the House of Commons. This is Keir Starmer, question 2.
Mr. Speaker, the sight of them howling with rage over a tweet, signing greening letters in their dozens, desperately trying to cancel a football highlight show, that should have been laughable. Instead, it led to a farcical weekend, with the national broadcast being accused of dancing to the government's tune by its own employees. Rather than blame everyone else, why doesn't he take some responsibility, stand up to his snowflake MPs waging war on free speech?
Slightly better cheer from the Labour benches there than we get normally.
Mr. Speaker, just the usual political opportunism from the leader of the Labour Party. Because I don't know if he noticed. But actually first the Shadow Attorney General and then the Shadow Home Secretary actually criticised the language that had been used in the tweet. But what a surprise. He saw the chance to jump on a political bandwagon and changed his mind.
Where to start?
Clearly, Keir Starmer is going to go down the stand-up route. It's actually quite funny mocking these Tory MPs as snowflakes.
Yeah, it is, particularly, hoisted by Lee Anderson, Scott Benson and Jonathan Gullis, hoisted by their own petard by Keir Starmer. Interesting, though, Rishi Sunak's reply there, I thought raised a serious point about the Labour Party's sort of strategic muddle on the question of migration, right? Because Rishi Sunak is right. Last Wednesday, Yvette Cooper said on the Today programme, I disagree with what Gary Lineker said. It was the wrong comparison. It was crass or whatever. Now, fast forward, Keir Starmer is treating all of this as a joke and perhaps a question primarily for the BBC and not about the Home Office, and which raises the question, right, well, hang on, do you agree with Gary Lineker or not? If this is ridiculous, then why was Vivek Cooper rowing in on the side of the government last week? Are you entirely comfortable taking sides in this battle about migration? I suspect the answer is no. And if you look at the polling, their target voters are picking that up too. James Johnson, friend of the show, his firm JL Partners published yesterday 2 word clouds, one in February 2023, one in March 2023, which contained all the words Labour switchers, would-be Labour switchers gave that made them hesitate before changing their preference from Tory to Labour. Last month it was the leader of the Labour Party. This month it's migration. So clearly the Tories are succeeding in reframing the debate. Labour are clearly feeling confident in using this PMQs, even though no one's going to pay much attention. But I think Rishi Sunak is right to point out that there is a sort of squeamishness still there in the Labour Party, a bit of a strategic muddle.
And the point that Rishi Sunak was talking about Shadow Attorney General is Emily Thornberry. Lots of very prominent Labour figures did pile in to the culture war over Gary Lineker. So for Keir Starmer to now turn up, it's all a big joke and everybody needs to calm down. People are absolutely losing their mind about this stuff.
Yeah, no.
In fact, didn't somebody say it was like Putin's Russia yesterday in the comments? Was that a Labour front bencher? I think anyway.
That's a very good question.
I will check. I think somebody, having said it was all a load of nonsense, likened it to Putin's Russia. I'll try and dig that out in just a sec. Let's go back to the House of Commons question number 3.
Keir Starmer. So, Mr. Speaker,
I'm not being funny. I think our constituents want to get to the budget. The more that you shout, the more you progress questions. So please, my constituents interested if yours aren't. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, they want more of a Prime Minister who doesn't understand. You can disagree with what somebody says, but still defend their right to say it. He doesn't understand that. We're in a real problem. Does he accept that people's concerns about the BBC have been made worse because the government chose to put a Tory donor with no broadcasting experience in charge of the BBC?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as he well knows, the BBC chairman was appointed before I became Prime Minister.
Nothing to do with me.
He was appointed. He was appointed.
And the same applies to this side. This budget matters to the people of this country. They want to hear it. Don't keep
Lindsay,
questions going longer than needed.
Now shouting at the Labour side.
Mr. Speaker, there was a rigorous, independent and long-established process. That appointment was supported by expert panel members, as well as the cross-party DCMS Select Committee. Now, it's right. That process is being independently reviewed by the Office for Commissioner of Public Appointments, and we should allow that review to conclude.
Now, I feel a bit uneasy about criticising someone with no previous experience getting a broadcasting job, given how I ended up on Times Radio. It's interesting that now, having done his gags, Keir Starmer is now sort of reversing into Richard Sharp and all of the revelations, thanks to the Sunday Times, about his involvement in loans to Boris Johnson and his role at the top of the BBC.
Also, the Labour Party criticising the BBC, it's not often you hear that, right? Because if the BBC is under, as people would say, people on Keir Starmer's side of the argument say, well, the BBC is under threat from a Conservative government that's seeking to, as Keir Starmer is arguing, seeking to influence its editorial output, etc., etc. But there is an implicit criticism of the BBC there. Keir Starmer is saying people's concerns about the BBC's output, be it in the form of Gary Lineker or its news output being influenced by Richard Sharp or others in its hierarchy. He's saying those concerns are legitimate. So it's a very interesting gambit. I wonder if there are two intended audiences here: the BBC hierarchy and Rishi Sunak. The nation might not be listening to this, but I'm sure Tim Davie will be poring over the Hansard of this later. It's interesting also to hear Rishi Sunak try and wash his hands of Richard Sharp.
It was all entirely above board, but to be clear, it was nothing to do with me.
Yeah, exactly. And Harry York, the Sunday Times deputy political editor, who, along with Gabriel Pogrund at the Sunday Times, broke many of the stories about Richard Sharp's role in brokering that 800 grand loan for Boris Johnson. He's just tweeted, "Oh dear, mistake there for Sunak to cite the DCMS Select Committee investigation when responding to Richard Sharp." A question from Keir Starmer. They've made it very clear that they were not given full facts, and it is entirely unsatisfactory for ministers to cite this as as a defence of his appointment.
Yeah, that's a good point, that. So, yeah, him saying it all went through the select committee. They've said, well, we didn't
They've
know.
said, well, hang on, the process is not worth the paper it's written on here.
Yeah. Lots of you posted comments on the YouTube channel. The most interesting have been hello from Southport.
Hey!
Simon says, Patrick makes me proud to come from Southport and great to see him flying the Southport flag.
At last, some recognition.
Is he a relative? Is he a relative of yours?
Is it GDPR compliant to say the surname?
No, it just says Stephen on there, so I don't know.
I'm not related to any Stevens, so thank you.
Is there actually a flag for Southport?
There ought to be one. I'll design one.
Ken's been in touch saying you can hardly move for people dancing in the street in Manchester Road. It's overcast in Southport.
Manchester Road, good pub there. The Cock and Rabbit.
You just made that up.
No. There used to be a restaurant there called the Barking Frog.
Well, there we are. If you've got any better pub names than the Cock and Rabbit,
the Mount Pleasant. The Mount's a very good pub.
Do put them in the comments on the YouTube. Right, because we're contractually obliged to. Let's go back to the House of Commons with whatever question is. Question 4 from Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is the chair of the BBC isn't just any old Tory donor. He's so close to the Prime Minister.
Order. Mr. Fabricant, I want you to be in for the budget. Cup of teas don't want to come that early.
That's Michael Fabricant, Tory MP, being told off.
Tory donor. He's so close to the Prime Minister, he's been described as his mentor. He helped arrange an £800,000 credit line for the former Prime Minister. A minor detail he forgot to tell the Select Committee, which scrutinised his appointment. Does the Prime Minister think that his friend's position is still tenable?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've just said, the office for the independent office for Commissioner of Public Appointments is reviewing what was a rigorous independent process to appoint the chairman. Instead of prejudging and preempting that review, we should let it conclude and wait for the outcome. That is the right way to do things, and that's what the government will do.
Independent, nothing to do with me.
Yeah, exactly. Rishi Sunak, not for the first time, deferring to independent process when lots of people would say, well, hang on, the issues here are, so big and obvious as to be visible from space. It's a bit of a holding line. You do get the sense that, given that Gary Lineker is staying, you wonder if other big names at the BBC can retain the credibility to see out the day here. Interesting that
does the Prime Minister think his friend's position is still tenable? Because it's pointing out that Rishi Sunak worked with Richard Sharp.
Yeah, indeed, that was the link in the first place.
Yeah.
They were both city boys, weren't they? So, Keir Starmer very much trying to tar the BBC, Number 10, and Richard Sharp all with the same brush.
Just to go back to the point I was making a bit earlier on, as Keir Starmer thought it was all very funny, people getting wound up and overexcited about the Gary Lineker episode. Yesterday, Lucy Powell, Labour's Shadow Culture Secretary, said the suspension of Gary Lineker from his presenting duties is echoes of Putin's Russia. Which obviously comes just days after he got into trouble for saying that it was like Nazis in the 1930s.
But this, Keir Starmer has tried very carefully here to situate himself above such sort of hyperventilating statements. But it just goes to show that Labour's message discipline, while much improved in recent months and years, still leaves a bit to be desired.
Yeah. And message discipline, ultimately, I suppose, that's where you'd have an Alistair Campbell berating people for not towing the line.
But you also need a message, and it's far from clear that beyond saying we'll do this better, we don't want to stop the boats. We'd like to stop the boats as well.
Labour don't really have a policy on boats. They don't really have a policy on the BBC.
Yeah.
So just winding up the Tories.
There's a squeamishness about being seen as the party of, the strategic thinkers in the leader's office or the people who are in charge of writing these messages. There's among some of them, a squeamishness about being seen as the party of Gary Lineker and the Church of England on this issue. But instinctively, lots of people in the shadow cabinet and in the Parliamentary Labour Party, that's exactly the position they want to take. And I think you see that from Lucy Powell there.
Ken's been back in touch. The Cock and Rabbit, I'd rather go on the wagon. As well, the guest house is the place to be. And the Cock and Rabbit's currently having a refurb.
Oh, is it?
Yes, there we are.
Well, Ken might have to eat his words. The Guest House is a great pub. Next time the Lib Dems are in Southport for spring conference, Matt, I'll take you on a crawl.
Are you going to York this weekend?
Absolutely not.
Back to the House of Commons then. Question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, when people with links to the Tory party somehow find themselves in senior positions at the BBC, it's important that their impartiality is seen to be beyond reproach. So has the Prime Minister received assurances that no one with links to the Tory party was lobbied by Tory MPs or involved in the decision that saw Match of the Day effectively cancelled?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said, these are matters. These are matters for the BBC to resolve. And it's right. It's right that the BBC, as an important institution, takes its obligations to impartiality seriously. Right? I care about the integrity and impartiality of our institutions, the BBC, but also the civil service, Mr. Speaker. And it's right that those processes carry on properly. But what I would say to him on this matter, there is an independent review. It's right that that process concludes, and he would, I would hope, respect that process.
What do we want? To respect the independent process. I wonder whether Keir Starmer, although he's only got one question left, it might not be the moment to pull it out. I don't know if is he suggesting he's got evidence of Tory MPs lobbying Tory donor to do something about Gowrie Lineker? That seems to be what he's implying.
It's quite possible. Also, the Guardian overnight had a story about concerns within the BBC moderating its coverage or telling reporters to attack the Labour Party or, change their terminology because Number 10 had said so. Emails exchanged between editors during the pandemic.
So things like when Boris Johnson announced the first lockdown, there was a message saying Number 10
don't call it a lockdown. Number 10 have asked that we don't call this a lockdown. Now it's very interesting listening to Keir Starmer there. I think there is a message for the BBC here from Keir Starmer, which is don't expect us to come to your rescue. Given that we too have serious concerns about your impartiality, and we can't be sure you're giving us a fair crack of the whip. I think that may well be what the message Keir Starmer is trying to impart to a very small audience here.
Yes, and I suppose the big problem the BBC have is it's simultaneously Tory MPs carrying on like it's a hotbed of socialism and anti-government wokery, and Labour MPs carrying on like it's a Tory mouthpiece propaganda machine. I suppose some people in the BBC will say, "Well, it shows us we're doing our job properly." But for long-term sustainability of a public broadcaster,
one whose funding model is under constant question, more intense questioning than ever before.
Yeah.
It's a tricky position for them to be in if the opposition isn't four square behind you.
Yeah.
Especially an opposition that is basically saying we agree with its most prominent star and disagree with its leadership.
Right, let's go back to the House of Commons then. The last question, we've got about 10 minutes to go before Jeremy Hunt is up for the budget. Let us know what you're expecting. What would you like to see in the budget? You can text me 87222, start message the word Times, tweet me at Times Radio. What do you want to see in the budget in 10 minutes' time? Now, though, back to the last question. This is Keir Starmer in the House of Commons.
Keir Starmer.
He comes here today with these mealy-mouthed platitudes, pretending the actions of his party are nothing to do with him.
Imagine being accused of mealy-mouthed platitudes by Keir Starmer.
How he kept quiet and hid behind the playground bullies while they tried to drive someone out simply for disagreeing with them. An impartial public broadcaster, free of government interference, is a crucial pillar in our country. But isn't that put at risk by the cancel culture addicts on his benches, the BBC leadership that caves into their demands, and a Prime Minister too weak to do anything about them?
Mr. Speaker, we're not going to take any lectures on cancel culture from the party opposite. But we know what this is about, and he's avoided it in 6 questions. The substance of the issue that this underlied this tweet. And that's what has he done in this past week? The only thing he and his party have done is voted against our bill to stop the boats, Mr. Speaker. siding with people smugglers over the British people. That's the substance of what's happened. Instead, what have we done? Is conclude a new migration deal with France, Mr. Speaker. We've managed to sign a new defence partnership with our allies, the US and Australia. We've protected British startups and we have boosted defence spending. And that, Mr. Speaker, is what delivering for Britain looks like.
And there, essentially, is Rishi Sunak rehearsing what he hopes will be his pitch at the general election. I get stuff done. It's not all of it's very exciting. It's a bit, bit of defence here, bit of startups there, but put it all together, and he's now starting to shape what sounds, if you don't listen too closely, a bit like a record to stand by.
Yes, exactly. Something that he can stand up in 2024 and say, a bit done, much more to do, and also, incidentally, doing stuff that the Labour Party would much rather not talk about. And as we were saying earlier, I think Keir Starmer was on a hiding to nothing, trying to rise above the fray of the substantive debate, as Rishi Sunak said, because Rishi Sunak can always come back, especially on the sixth question. Keir Starmer has no right to reply there, obviously. But it's always going to be tricky when Keir Starmer is trying to comment on the Gary Lineker row without disagreeing or agreeing with the substance of what Gary Lineker said. You heard him before say you can disagree with what Gary Lineker said while defending his right to say it, but it still wasn't clear whether he...
Anybody who has a view on Gary Lineker has a view on whether or not they agree with what he said.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got the budget coming in about 5 minutes' time. Jeremy Hunt will be at the dispatch box laying out his first budget. It's the first budget we've actually had in 18 months because of... Despite all those statements last year, none of them were actually budgets. But we've just got time for the leader of the SNP in Westminster. This is Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, as households in Scotland were awakening to freezing temperatures, they were met with the news that the electricity grid had been upgraded in order to meet the power demands of the Prime Minister's new swimming pool. So may I ask him, was it whilst he was taking a leisurely dip that he decided to leave households drowning in their energy bills?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, thanks to the actions of this government, what we've provided is over £1,300 to help families with their energy bills over the last year. Now, I won't want to preempt what the Chancellor is going to say later, but this is a government that is committed to continuing to help people with the cost of living, and that's what you'll hear later on.
Stephen Flynn.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to preempt the budget by, putting out a press release at 7 o'clock this morning, which is what the Treasury did. This story about Rishi Sunak's swimming pool is just obviously funny, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And politically, it's the sort of thing that people might remember.
Well, exactly, given that the local council in question has been curtailing the opening hours and shutting swimming pools, council swimming pools in its own area.
There's going to be some money in the budget for swimming pools, for local council swimming pools. There is. I don't know if it was stuck in there.
Well, look, that may well be, given it's probably a pretty small amount of money.
Yeah, it is.
In the grand scheme of things, both in context and in real terms. You do have to wonder whether at some point in the Treasury there's been a conversation about this very issue.
Just cough up. Yeah, can you find some money? Well, we are gearing up now for the budget. That brings us to the end of PMQs Unpacked. For at least for this week. We'll be back with it same time next week. Don't forget you can always listen back to it on the Red Box podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from. Big moment for this government and for the Conservatives, Patrick, after the complete demolition of their reputation for economic competency last year, caused by the mini budget under Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. And Rishi Sunak's had some good days. He got the Brexit deal through. He's signed a defence deal here. He's been to France. He's got these things to tick off. If you look at the polls, they haven't budged since about a week after he took over. And on every possible measure, they are a long way behind.
No, exactly. And his personal numbers are improving. But it's clear that the Conservative Party is still a drag anchor on him. And whether, he may well land this budget may well land well, but it's pretty clear at this point that the Conservative Party's brand is in very, very dire straits, akin to the position it was in after Black Wednesday, a similar watershed moment for its economic reputation. And it'll be interesting to see whether, as you say, with lots of big things, big wins for the government as they would see it, having failed to make any dent in this at all, whether even a budget, and a budget that appears to contain some very retail-friendly policies, the childcare, for instance, whether that will make a difference either.
And I mean, it's extraordinary if you think this time last year, if somebody had said that Jeremy Hunt would be delivering his first budget for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, when we were in the middle of Partygate this time last year?
Yes, we were.
But thought that Boris Johnson was going to survive it.
Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, wouldn't have sounded plausible. Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor would have been a big surprise.
Yeah, well, I think nobody was more surprised than him when he got that call from...
He was on holiday.
Liz Truss. He was it in
Brussels?
Brussels, yeah. Got
revealing his true colours.
Kwarteng finding out he was being sacked via a tweet from Stephen
on the M4.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. This is Times Radio with Matt Chorley. We are awaiting Jeremy Hunt's first budget live from the House of Commons. Throughout the afternoon, we'll bring you all the reaction you need. Mariella Foster will pick up straight after we've heard from Jeremy Hunt and Keir Starmer. She'll be here until 3 o'clock. Then at 3 o'clock, Jane Garvey and Fee Glover take over. Then live from 5, it's Times Radio Drive. John Pinnar live from Westminster with all the reaction and analysis you need. Now, at the time at 12:30, a look at the headlines. The Chancellor's about to stand up to deliver his budget and the economic forecast for the country. He's likely to offer some tax relief to businesses to compensate for the planned increase in corporation tax. Jeremy Hunt will announce 3 hours of childcare for 1- and 2-year-olds. There's also expected to be a 1-year extension of the 5p cut in fuel duty at a cost of £6 billion. And there'll be attempts to get over 50s back in work with the ability to add more to their pension pot before it's taxed. And as we've just been hearing at Prime Minister's Questions, Keir Starmer accused the Conservatives of driving out Gary Lineker and being cancel culture addicts. The Labour leader asked whether the chair of the BBC, Richard Sharp's position was still tenable. Rishi Sunak said the appointment process was rigorous and accused Sir Keir of jumping on the political bandwagon. And elsewhere, transport, education and health services are all being disrupted today as hundreds of thousands of workers take part in strike action. The head of one union representing civil servants says there will be a significant escalation unless ministers agree to discuss pay. We'll have to wait and see if Jeremy Hunt's got anything to say about public sector pay today. That's always one of the big issues which hasn't been addressed so far. So far, he's been unwilling to get his checkbook out. Stay tuned to Times Radio for the rest of the day with all the reaction and analysis you need. And, of course, Time subscribers, I think there's a live blog there and loads of analysis all afternoon.
And there's a special Red Box email for subscribers that will come out after Jeremy Hunt has been speaking.
So, Time subscribers, to sign up to that, you need to go to thetimes.co.uk/Redbox. Now we can go live to the House of Commons. This is Chancellor Jeremy Hunt.
Enormous challenges. I report today on a British economy which is proving the doubters wrong. Yeah. In the autumn, we took difficult decisions to deliver stability and sound money. Since mid-October, 10-year gilt rates have fallen, debt servicing costs are down, mortgage rates are lower, and inflation has peaked. The International Monetary Fund says our approach means the UK economy is on the right track. Yeah. But we remain vigilant and will not hesitate to take whatever steps are necessary for economic stability. Today, the Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts that because of changing international factors and the measures I take, the UK will not now enter a technical recession this year. Yeah. They forecast we will meet the Prime Minister's priorities to halve inflation, reduce debt and get the economy growing. We are following the plan and the plan is working. But that's not all we've done. In the face of a cost of living crisis, we have demonstrated our values by protecting struggling families with a £2,500 energy price guarantee, one-off support and the uprating of benefits with inflation.